I am very moved because I've learned so much, and this has been an incredibly rich intellectual, historical, analytical roundtable. And the fact that the three of you dealing with such difficult issues and long-lived, God forbid, 800 years of division and crisis and war and violence, that you've been able to encapsulate all this in such a truly a nutshell, each of you. I'm very, very grateful. We will have time to talk together about this, but I'd like to right now move on to introduce our afternoon keynote speaker. Many of you know him, and Dr. Han Sung-joo is a beloved figure in Washington. He's a beloved figure in many parts of the world, and I have had the fortune and pleasure of knowing him since I was 21 years old. And I would say in the Korean tradition, you don't refer to your elders of such status as your soulmate, but in some ways, he's my novel reading soulmate. I love looking at novels and thinking of him and thinking, would he like to read this? And then I send them to him or pass it along as a gift. And I love the fact that he reads not only international relations theory and political science and area studies, but also novels. Dr. Han Sung-joo, everybody knows, is a historic figure in South Korean politics, the academy, and in U.S.-Korea relations. I think there are no other Dr. Han Sung-joos as a type in South Korea. And I will hope that one day one evolves, but truly it requires evolution because he has developed into the kind of diplomat and reconciler, true reconciler of multiple issues and peoples over many decades. So I respect him immensely. Many of us know him through his work on U.S.-Korea relations and as the former foreign minister of the ROK, the former ROK ambassador to the United States, and also as professor emeritus at Korea University. And as I was listening to this panel and looking at over the bio, I thought, Dr. Han, you are a personal reconciler of divisions in South Korea. Why? Because he's a graduate of Seoul National University. And in his generation, you were never supposed to go to another territory, such as Korea University, and devote your adult life to the growth of that institution, the other institution, and even become acting president of that university. So he has accomplished things in his personal professional life as well as in his diplomatic worldly life. I asked Dr. Han to come again to Washington after just having been here on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the agreed framework decisions agreement. And I felt very guilty because it's a long trip, and going back and forth takes a huge toll. But he graciously, generously accepted. And the reason I asked him is, again, not to talk so much about the Koreas and U.S. and Korea, but because he has other expertise. He served as the UN Secretary General's special advisor to Cyprus, the very island that Dr. Barkey has been talking about, and the crisis there over division and conflict. So Dr. Han brings many different insights from many parts of the world, and I will leave it to him to educate us all. Dr. Han Sung-joo.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be back in Washington and at Brookings to talk about something that is different than usual, the usual being security and policy now and later. We talk about history and the meaning of it and what it portends for the future as well. I was asked to talk about the division and reconciliation in Korea in comparative perspective. I think I was also asked to participate partly because of my Cyprus background. I was going to start by saying that there are some peculiar similarities between Cyprus and Korea that historically Korea was the only country colonized by another Asian country, Japan. Cyprus was the only European country colonized by another European country, Britain. But I'm not going to say that because I'm going to get questions like, what about Taiwan? What about Ireland? What about the Chinese Empire? What about the Soviet Empire? And so on. But in simplicity, that I think holds some truth. In fact, there are still two fairly large tracts of land known as sovereign bases that Britain uses for military purposes. As such, there are mixed sentiments, sometimes positive, but mostly negative, in both Korea and Cyprus toward their respective former colonial countries. Korea and Cyprus both have formal armistice lines dividing their territory known as the Military Demarcation Line, or MDL, in Korea, and the Green Line in Cyprus. But the Korean MDL is longer, wider, more closed, and much more heavily fortified. There's also a large economic development gap between the two divided parts. What makes the two cases quite distinct is the sociological and historical background of their division. Cyprus was divided as a result of ethnic conflict between the Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, while Korea was divided by the geopolitics of the United States and the Soviet Union. It was in connection with the situation in Cyprus, some Cypriots of both sides claim, that the expression ethnic cleansing started to be used first. Today, many, that is, more than half of some 200,000 residents in the northern Turkish Cyprus, are not even original Cypriots, but are settlers who came to Cyprus from Turkey's Anatolia after the division of Cyprus in 1974. There's much less commonality between the southern and northern Cypriot people that bring them together, as we heard, and more grievances and animosity that separate them. By contrast, one still hears North and South Koreans chanting, "We are one people," and for the most part, there's no sign of animosity between them on the people's level. The division has been so long and so complete in Korea, and the people of the South and North have had such little direct contact that if grievances or animosity still existed as a result of the Korean War, it would be among and between South Koreans themselves, as much of the mutual assault took place in localities in the South. So what reconciliation and justice do we need to seek between the North and South in the case of reunification? On this question, perhaps we should look to other cases of divided countries, such as Germany and Vietnam, for comparison with Korea. And today, I will only talk about Germany. Of the 4 countries divided after World War II, Germany, Korea, China, and Vietnam, Korea and China remained divided, and Germany and Vietnam have been reunified. Germany by incorporation and Vietnam by force. The main difference between Germany and Korea in their division was that while Germany was the precipitator of the Second World War, Korea was merely the victim of an arbitrary decision made by the victors, the US and the USSR. Thus, Koreans feel that while Germany may have itself to blame for the division, Korea was the innocent and helpless victim. In the divided Germany, there was no animosity or hostility between the people of the West and of the East. Germans in the West felt sympathy towards their brethren in the East and wanted to help them to improve their economic situation, regain political freedom, and free them from the Soviet yoke. Germans in the East envied the freedom and prosperity their Western brethren enjoyed, and after reunification, problems arose from three sources. One, the issue of dealing with properties in the eastern part of Germany that used to be owned by those who are now living in West Germany. Two, what to do with those responsible for the political oppression of East Germans, especially those related with or to the Stasi organization. And three, the sense of second-class citizenship felt by the East Germans known as Ossis toward those supposedly high-handed West Germans known as Wessis. But these were manageable problems that were in fact managed and ameliorated in reasonable ways in the post-unification period. Even on the question of complicated property issue, Germany settled for monetary compensation for property lost during 1945-49 Soviet occupation period, lost after 1949 by DDR by return of the property to the original owners, or monetary compensation, and property lost during the Nazi period by both methods. I may be misinformed on this, and we might have the benefit of knowing more about the situation by Ambassador Zeit. In the Korean case, although there was an internecine war, Koreans feel no animosity toward the South Koreans feel no animosity toward the North Korean people. Instead, they feel the similar sympathy for the North Koreans for their dire economic situation and lack of freedom. Similarly, as the East Germans, North Koreans feel envious of South Koreans who enjoy relative economic prosperity and political freedom. Some may feel South Korea should be doing more to help them economically and to improve their political predicament. In the case of Korea, the conflict and cleavage that needs to be reconciled exists not so much between North and South Koreans themselves as between the South Korean left and the South Korean right, a phenomenon known in Korea as the South-South conflict. To be sure, some of the left or right are moderate and some are radical or extreme. The conflict is based on opposing interpretations and understandings of a whole range of historical issues, such as the division of the country, origin of the Korean War, Jeju Uprising of 1945-48, known as the April 3rd Incident, Gwangju Massacre in 1980, and Kim Dae-jung-Kim Jong-il Summit of 2000. The left is critical of the United States for being mainly responsible for the division of the country, for supporting and encouraging successive military and authoritarian governments in South Korea, and for presumably fostering tension on the Korean Peninsula. The right accuses the left of towing and supporting the North Korean line, undermining South Korean alliance with the United States, and trying to weaken the legitimacy of the South Korean government. The left regards South Korea's successive rightist regimes, starting from Syngman Rhee to Park Chung-hee on to Lee Myung-bak, as having been insufficiently nationalistic, meaning not anti-Japan enough and too dependent on the United States. In this regard, they would view North Korean government as having stronger credentials on nationalism issues. The right responds by emphasizing the contribution made by their leaders to the cause of independence and subsequent economic development. They, both the left and the right, have been fighting over history, textbooks, what to teach and not to teach in schools, and whom to revere and whom to despise. Until the German reunification, I'm using the term reunification for Germany and unification for Korea, as you might have noticed, because that's the way both Germans and Koreans use the term. While the right, which feared, it was the South Korean left which clamored for unification before, while the right, which feared that it would mean unification under North Korean auspices, took the defensive position. However, the tables were turned after German reunification, in that the left began to fear that any unification, following the German example, would come as a result of South Korean absorption of the North. It was now the right which became more vociferous about the need for unification of Korea. As it happens, the moderate left, currently represented by the opposition party, is in favor of providing massive and unconditional economic aid to North Korea, reducing tension and arms competition with North Korea, and expanding cooperation with it. The right is in favor of strengthening the alliance with the United States, more actively and aggressively promoting human rights in North Korea, and promoting unification at an earlier date. They are against providing large-scale economic assistance to North Korea, while it devotes resources to development of weapons of mass destruction, such as nuclear weapons and missiles. In this context, it is interesting to speculate on what role the South Korean left would play if and when unification comes. Given that after 10 years of controlling the government during the Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun presidencies, the left has difficulty expanding its electoral support base in the South. The Progressive Party or parties will try to expand their electoral support base in the northern part of Korea after unification by promising more economic benefits, social welfare, and greater political autonomy for North Korea, promises that the right will find hard to match. The left may well succeed in their effort to expand support in the North, provided that somehow they succeed in finding coherence and unity among their various factions and individuals. No matter what happens in the balance of political forces after unification, it is not clear what will happen to the degree and intensity of the conflict and bad blood between the political left and political right in Korea, particularly between the extreme or radical left and right. It is a conflict that will not disappear with unification and that will continue to hamper the unity and harmony of the nation as a whole. In the North, there will be, after unification, the serious but inevitable issue of settling score with and taking punitive measures against those involved in the oppressive state and party apparatus. the success of this task will depend very much on how limited the scope of the rectification, how judiciously the punishment is meted out, and how fairly the operation is conducted. On the property issue, the Korean case is expected to be much less burdensome than that of Germany. One, the number of claims will be smaller. Germany, there are more than 2 million claims in the legal process. In Korea, so far, there have been only several thousand registrations. Even though the number of properties confiscated reach 420,000 cases. Secondly, the records, including deeds, land registry, are very scanty because of the war, because of the erasure of the records in the course of change of skies between North and South Korea. Three, there's less public support for returning the lost properties in Korea. And as you know, there's an expression in Korea, sentiments always trumps legality in Korea. There are three basic solutions. One is symbolic compensation. Second is giving it to the current owner. The third is return to the original owner. And an overwhelming sentiment is in favor of giving very symbolic compensation to whoever has the documentation and proper inheritance has been taken care of. And finally, there's another reason, and that is the Korean division has lasted much longer, the original owners all having expired physically. I would like to add just a couple of footnotes to what I've said so far. One distinguishing aspect of Korean division compared with that of Germany and Vietnam is that it has lasted longer, nearly 70 years or over 2 generations, than that of the other 2 countries, which were divided for 35 and 25 years respectively. The long period of division resulted in a demographic change, particularly involving the generational change, which has been extensive and significant. Increasingly fewer numbers of individuals with the memory of living together with family members, friends, and colleagues separated since division are surviving today. Their descendants and other Koreans of younger generations would naturally have more muted feelings toward Korea and Koreans of the other side, whether they are positive or negative feelings. In South Korea until the late 1980s, it was the younger generation and political forces of the left, as I said, which showed strongest interest in national unification. They denounced the older generations and foreign powers which supposedly stood in the way of national unification. Since the early 1990s, however, they became more globalized and utilitarian and focused more on mundane matters as jobs and careers. Members of the younger generation who shared the progressive views of their seniors also shied away from the unification cause for reasons that their older ideological compatriots did. What these generational and demographic changes indicate is that time matters in how necessary, feasible, and attainable reconciliation will be in any divided country. Unless the conflict is of what is known as primordial nature, such as ethnicity and religion, as in Cyprus or Northern Ireland, with the passage of time, negative feelings and the need for reconciliation would matter less when division is felt still fresh in everyone's memory and living experience. I would also like to add one more footnote about restoring commonality between North and South Koreans. In this connection, I would also like to speak about the critical role of those known as North Korean defectors, 탈북자 in South Korea. The phenomenon that is worrisome about the long period of division between the North and the South is not so much antagonism between the residents of the two Koreas as their losing commonality, in Korean known as 이질화, becoming different, as one people in such key areas as language, at least in vocabulary and expressions, ways of thinking and living, interpersonal relations, and abilities and skills. Upon unification, they will have the serious task of enlarging and restoring areas of commonality, in Korean, 동질화, or becoming the same. Meeting this challenge will require effective policies of the government and active role of the civic groups. But the group of people who will play a key role will be those who are known as North Korean defectors in the South, the number of whom has grown to nearly 30,000 by the end of 2014. To be sure, they have more grievances toward the North Korean regime than the South Koreans. However, they have more connections with people in the North. They have the experience of living in both parts of Korea. They understand the ways of thinking and living in both North and South Korea, and they have more ability to create a bridge between the Koreans of the North and the South. Whether and how well they can play the role of bringing the two peoples that will have lived apart for so long will depend much upon how they are treated in the South and how smoothly and well they integrate into the South Korean society. So what conclusions or words of wisdom can I draw from the remarks so far? One, more often than not, division is not the result of hostility and animosity between the peoples of a divided country, but that of geopolitics, historical circumstances, and government policies. Certainly this is the case in Korea. As such, reconciliation is more often the result rather than the cause of unification or reunification. In the case of Korea, reconciliation within each of the divided parts, South-South, North-South, remains at least as formidable a task as reconciliation between the peoples of the respected parts. I guess this is the point that Stacy Stoddard mentioned earlier. 3, history and interpretations thereof influences history in Korea. The left and the right often have opposite views on what happened in history and adopt different policies when they assume power. In South Korea, the left thinks the US has kept Korea from reunifying. The right thinks the United States saved South Korea from extinction. They differ most distinctly on how to deal with North Korea and how to handle alliance with the United States. 4, policy statements and decisions affect the interpretation and politicization of history. Characterization of the other side as warmongering only results in accelerated arms race and greater insecurity. Furthermore, the policy statements and decisions made can often result in self-fulfilling prophecies, especially in the area of mutual distrust and insecurity. Finally, even the cases are never identical in all respects. It is useful to engage in comparative analysis of Korea-related issues and the role of the United States through other country cases of political division and reconciliation. What happened and happens in other cases can provide lessons to follow or anti-lessons to avoid in the case at hand, which is Korea. Thank you very much.